So thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here. I love Chicago. The theme of today is edges. And I'm going to tell you a story this morning which involves me pushing myself to all sorts of edges, some of them supremely dumb, and some of them reasonably useful and perhaps even useful to you. The story starts with a panic attack on national television. The little show you may have heard of called Good Morning America. So this happened, and I'm actually going to show you the panic attack. It happened back in June of 2004. Because I'm a masochist, I actually asked our research department to find out exactly how many people were watching, and they came back with a number of 5.019 million. So, no big deal. In this video clip I'm about to show you, I give a blow-by-blow account of my on-air Waterloo. Check it out.
From ABC News, this is Good Morning America.
Welcome to the most embarrassing day of my life.
We're going to go now to Dan Harris, who's at the news desk. Dan?
Good morning, Charlie and Diane. Thank you. This is me 10 years ago. And the reason this is the most embarrassing day of my life is not that it looks like I've been attacked by a blow dryer and a can of hairspray. No, it's that I am about to freak out on national television. Health news now. One of the world's most commonly prescribed medications may be providing a big bonus. Researchers report people who take cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins for at least 5 years may also lower their risk for cancer. But it's too early to prescribe statins slowly for cancer production. At this point, I realize I'm helpless, so I bail right in the middle. That does it for news. We're going to go back now to Robin and Charlie.
All right, thanks very much, Dan Harris at the news desk with some of the headlines of the morning. Want to go to Tony Perkins now. He is...
Once the fear subsided, humiliation rushed in. I knew with rock-solid certainty that I had just had a panic attack on national television. I've watched that clip hundreds of times, and it sucks every time. To my vast surprise, that terrible moment ended up leading me to something that has really improved my life. I will tell you about that in a minute, but I want to tell you first about the backstory to that panic attack. I think at the root of the most embarrassing moment of my life was something that we all share, which is a desire to be great at what we do. I arrived at ABC News at age 28. This is the picture they took of me on my first day at work. It's literally still on my security ID, despite repeated attempts to have it removed. A friend of mine later joked that if you take a wide shot, it looks like I might be holding a balloon. So I was very green, and I was working with giants like Peter Jennings, Diane Sawyer, and Barbara Walters. I knew I was green. I was self-conscious and insecure about it. And my way of dealing with that was to become a workaholic. Not long after I arrived at ABC News, I arrived in 2000. Not long after I arrived in 2001, 9/11 happened. And I raised my hand very eagerly to go overseas and cover the ensuing conflicts, frankly, without thinking much about the psychological consequences. This is a picture of me with the Taliban in Kandahar while they were still in control in October of 2001, so just not long after 9/11. And after this experience, I spent years in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and made 6 or 7 trips to Iraq. And when I got home from one particularly long and hairy stretch in Iraq in the late summer of 2003, I got depressed. And embarrassingly, I actually didn't even know I was depressed, although I was exhibiting what I now know to be some of the classic signs and symptoms of depression. I was having trouble getting out of bed. I felt like I had a low-grade fever all the time. And at this point, I did a toweringly stupid thing, which is I started to self-medicate with recreational drugs, including cocaine and ecstasy. Before you get too worried, I want to add that it wasn't like the Wolf of Wall Street or anything like that. It was reasonably sporadic, never when I was working, definitely not when I was on the air. As I like to say, I was stupid, but not that stupid. After the panic attack, actually after having 2 panic attacks, I went to a doctor who was an expert in panic to try to figure out what was going on. And he asked me a series of questions to diagnose the problem. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs? To which I sheepishly responded, yeah, I do. And he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that said, okay, asshole, mystery solved. And that moment, it hit me very powerfully what a moron I'd been. And I made two big decisions. One was I quit using drugs, which was kind of a no-brainer. And two, I decided to go see this shrink indefinitely and weekly. But that, however, was not enough to get me really where I needed to go. There was something else afoot, and it involved this guy, Peter Jennings, who was my boss and my mentor. And he gave me an assignment that I really didn't want. He assigned me to cover faith and spirituality for ABC News. Now, I was raised in the People's Republic of Massachusetts by a pair of secular scientists. I did have a bar mitzvah, but that was only for the money. I tried to explain this to Peter. I left out the mercenary bar mitzvah part, but I tried to explain that I wasn't really into this thing, and he said, I don't care, you're going to do it anyway. So it turned out to be a great thing. I spent the following years in mosques and megachurches and Mormon temples. I made great friends. I learned a lot. I realized how ignorant I was on many, many levels. And I really saw the power of having a worldview that transcends your own narrow interests. Now, that said, none of what I encountered really spoke to me personally. I didn't go kosher or anything like that until the year 2008. So many years after I was assigned to cover religion and many years after my panic attack, one of my producers recommended I read a book by this guy, whose name is Eckhart Tolle. I had never heard of him, but he is a mega best-selling self-help guru. And my producer's argument was, this guy is selling millions of books. Oprah, hometown girl, Oprah loves him, celebrities love him, let's do a story on him. So I ordered one of his books and I started to read it, and at first, I will be honest, it struck me as irredeemable bullshit. I mean, it was just filled with all this weird language about vibrational fields and pseudoscientific assertions and grandiose claims about how this book was going to provoke a spiritual awakening, whatever that means, in you, the reader, and how after his own personal spiritual awakening, he lived in a state of bliss on park benches in the city of London for 2 years. Last time I checked, they actually have winter in London. So I was not impressed by Tolle until, as I continued to soldier through his book, he started to unfurl a diagnosis of the human condition that I had never heard before and that I found extremely compelling. Tolle's argument is that we all have a voice in our heads, by which he is not referring to schizophrenia or hearing voices. He's talking about your inner narrator that chases you out of bed in the morning and is yammering at you all day long. It has you constantly wanting stuff, not wanting stuff, judging people, judging yourself very harshly. Here's one of the hallmarks: thinking about the past or thinking about the future instead of focusing on what's happening right now. I have a friend named Sam Harris. We're not related, but he's written a book that's not dissimilar to mine, and he says when he thinks about the voice in his head, it makes him think that he's been hijacked by the most boring person alive, who just says the same shit over and over. Most of it negative, all of it self-referential. Tolle's thesis is that when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation that you are having with yourself, it yanks you around. It's why you find yourself all of a sudden with your hand in the fridge when you're not even that hungry, while you're checking your mobile device when your children are trying to talk to you, while you're losing your temper when it's not in your best interest. This was a huge aha moment for me when I read this. I realized a couple of things. One, this is just intuitively and universally true. And two, this explains the most embarrassing moment of my life. The voice is why I went to war without really thinking about it, why I got depressed and was insufficiently self-aware to know I was depressed, and then I blindly self-medicated and it all blew up in my face. Suffice it to say, it was a little embarrassing to be reading a book by this guy and thinking he gets me. But there are even more serious problems. As far as I could tell, and maybe I was being obtuse, but I could not see any practical advice in his book for dealing with the voice in the head. So I actually went and interviewed him, and it was the first question I asked: what do you do about the voice in the head? And he said, take one conscious breath. What the hell does that mean? And I kept at him. I asked him a million questions about practical advice, and he was unwilling or unable to give me a shred of it. And then things got even more weird when I asked him if he ever gets into a bad mood. Take a listen to what he had to say. Don't you ever get annoyed, irritated, sad, anything negative?
No, I accept what is. And that's why life has become so simple.
Well, if somebody cuts you off in your car?
It's fine. It's like a sudden gust of wind. I don't personalize a gust of wind. And so it's simply what is.
And you're able to enjoy every moment, even if I start asking you a ton of annoying questions?
Yes, that would be fine. So it's really...
Don't tempt me. Very frustrating man. It was as if he had pointed out that my hair was on fire and then refused to give me a fire extinguisher. Not knowing what else to do, all of this being very, very new to me, I sort of threw myself then into the world of self-help, which turned out to be not a great idea. And I met a lot of questionable people who tell you that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking, which, I hate to break you, is not going to happen. At wit's end, I was then saved by my wife, my then fiancée and now wife, who I came home from work one night and she said, I've been hearing you talk about Eckhart Tolle and the voice in the head with varying levels of cogency for the last couple of weeks. And finally, it reminded me that I read a book about this that might be helpful for you. And it was by this guy, Dr. Mark Epstein, who's a shrink based in New York City. He's a psychiatrist, and he writes about the overlap between psychology and Buddhism. Notwithstanding the fact that I was ostensibly a religion reporter, I actually didn't know anything about Buddhism, other than the fact that when I was a 15-year-old punk kid, I had actually stolen a Buddha statue from a local gardening store and put it in my bedroom because I thought it looked cool. Unbeknownst to me, this dude, heretofore known to me only as a lawn ornament, 2,500 years before Eckhart Tolle started cashing his royalty checks, it was this guy who was talking about the voice in the head. He had a different term for it. He called it the monkey mind. According to the Buddha, we are like furry little gibbons, lurching through a forest of urges and impulses and desires, constantly clinging to things that will not last, hurling ourselves from one pleasant experience, one meal, one sexual encounter, one professional promotion to the next without ever being fully satisfied. So again, an aha moment. And unlike Eckhart Tolle, the Buddha had a very specific recommendation for dealing with the voice in the head. At this point, a fresh problem arises because what he was recommending sounded repellent to me. The Buddha said the way to deal with the voice in the head was to meditate. Now, in my view, meditation was only for people like this, hippies and freaks and weirdos and people who live in a yurt and are really into aromatherapy and John Tesh and Cat Stevens and wear little finger symbols and use the word namaste unironically. I'm actually not entirely wrong about that, but I ended up doing some research, like a good journalist, and I found that, in fact, meditation, this ancient and, in my view, weird and completely unattractive practice, has been the subject of an explosion of scientific interest in recent years. And while this research is still very much in its infancy, it's produced a long list of apparent benefits from meditation. And these include lowering the release of stress hormones, lowering your blood pressure, boosting your immune system, mitigating depression, ADHD, anxiety, age-related cognitive decline, which has becoming increasingly important to me. And it's even helping with seemingly unrelated things like irritable bowel syndrome and psoriasis. And things get truly sci-fi when we start talking about the neuroscience. Brain researchers have been peering into the brains of meditators and finding that when you meditate, you're basically performing a sort of neurosurgery on yourself. And it's not just dudes like this who wear robes. There was a study at Harvard in 2010 or 11, I can't remember which looked at people who had never meditated before. It scanned their brains. The researchers scanned their brains, and then they taught them how to meditate. And for 8 weeks, these people did short daily doses of meditation. They went on, they lived their lives as normal, except for they just added a couple of minutes of meditation a day. At the end, they scanned their brains again, and after 8 weeks, they found that the areas of the brain associated with self-awareness and compassion, the gray matter literally grew. And the area associated with stress, the gray matter literally shrank. And then I learned that meditation does not, despite its PR problem, involve joining a group, paying any fees, wearing any special outfits, clearing your mind, sitting in an uncomfortable position, or listening to John Tesh. No offense to John Tesh or anybody here who likes him. Actually, a little offense to you. In fact, there are only 3 steps to meditation. Let me just be clear. There are a million kinds of meditation. The kind of meditation I'm talking about is called mindfulness meditation, and it's the type that has been most studied in the labs. And it's secular and simple and largely scientifically validated. So oh, that's my cat. You don't have to sit like this, is the point. She's actually watching The Real Housewives there, which is embarrassing not for the cat, but for the person operating the television. And it was not me. My wife doesn't like when I drop that. Anyway, 3 steps. I'm not going to make you do this, but just so you know, all it involves is sit comfortably with your spine straight and your eyes closed. Second step is you try to feel the sensation of your breath coming in and going out, usually wherever it's most prominent, your belly, your chest, your nose. So you're just going to feel your breath coming in, feel it going out. The third step is the key. As soon as you try to do this, your mind's going to go nuts. You're going to start thinking about, what am I going to have for lunch? Why did I say that dumb thing to my boss? Why did Dances with Wolves beat Goodfellas for Best Picture in 1991? Why do celebrities only marry other celebrities? Whatever. It's going to go, you're going to go, it's not going to be pretty. The whole game is just to notice when your mind is off and start over. And then start over again, and then start over again. And every time you do that, that is a bicep curl for your brain, and it shows up on the brain scans. It is also, I might add, a radical act. You are breaking a lifetime's habit of walking around in a fog of projection and rumination. And you are focusing on what's happening right now. It's a cliche, but it's always right now, and that's where we live our lives, except for most of us don't. So when I learned all of this, I decided to give it a shot. This is me meditating. My wife took this picture. We were on vacation. Those are some opportunistic chickens. I started with like 5 or 10 minutes a day. And I'll be honest, I didn't like it. It's not easy. It's actually quite hard. It's a little bit like, trying to focus on one thing at a time is like holding a live fish in your hands. But very quickly, I started to experience some significant benefits. One, my ability to focus got better. Sitting there and trying to focus on one thing, getting lost, starting over, getting lost, starting over. I just noticed that in my job, where, by the way, I have other people's voices piped directly into my ear, I got better at focusing. The second benefit, though, was a big one. It's this word mindfulness. Some of you may have heard it. It's a kind of boring-sounding word, but it is a game changer. Mindfulness is the ability to see what's happening in your head in any given moment without getting carried away by it. I'm going to say this twice just because it's so important. It's the ability to know what's happening in your head right now without necessarily taking the bait and acting on it. Let me just put some meat on the bone here. Think about going to Starbucks. What happens if you're online and somebody cuts you off? You think to yourself automatically, I'm pissed. And then what happens? You habitually and reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction to it. With mindfulness on board, You might be able to notice, after just doing a little bit of meditation, you might be able to have the self-awareness to notice, oh, my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts right now, I'm getting angry. But I don't necessarily need to yell at this person in front of my kids and make a scene. As you can imagine, this is a very attractive skill. And let me just quickly add, some of you may be thinking, don't we need to get angry sometimes? Yes, I will concede that sometimes we do need to get angry, although I would argue it's less than you think. The proposition here isn't that you should be rendered into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The idea is that you should learn how to respond wisely to stimuli instead of reacting blindly. Most meditation cliches make me want to put a pencil into my eye, but the cliche of respond, not react, is so useful and so powerful that it can make a huge difference in your life, and is making a huge difference in the lives of a lot of people right now in very surprising contexts. It's being done by Google, Procter & Gamble, Aetna, Target, and General Mills. It's being done by, that's the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. They have a meditation coach. They won the Super Bowl. That's the lead singer of Weezer. It's being done by a lot of people in the entertainment field. And it's also, most compellingly, being done by the U.S. military. The U.S. Army and the U.S. Marines are spending millions of dollars to study whether meditation can make more effective and more resilient troops in the field. So at this point, as I get close to wrapping things up, I'm just going to make a prediction. With the caveat that my powers of prognostication are historically weak. In the early 2000s, I convinced my younger brother to invest a lot of money in the company that made the Palm Pilot. We didn't get a huge return on that investment. That being said, I can predict with a certain degree of confidence that meditation is the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, "Who's chasing you?" Then what happened? Scientists swooped in, proved that exercise is really good for you, and now we all exercise, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's what I think is going to happen with meditation. Despite the fact that I've now become, to my great surprise, a traveling evangelist for meditation, it is not going to solve all of your problems. Anybody, and there are lots of self-help gurus out there doing this, anybody who tells you there's a magic bullet is lying. I've learned the hard way that meditation is not going to regrow your hair or make you taller. But it can be a significant value add, which is why I wrote a book and I called it 10% Happier. Obviously, that's a unscientific estimate, but I like it because it's true enough and it sounds like a pretty good return on investment. My idea is that if we can strip meditation of its unfortunate Age of Aquarius cultural baggage, it could be made attractive to tens of millions of smart and skeptical people who would otherwise never go near it. At the heart of this idea of meditation is not something mystical or gooey. It's the idea that our happiness, which most of us assume is contingent upon external factors, that happiness is actually a skill, something you can train just the way you train your body in the gym. That is a tremendously liberating notion. Now, I've been doing it for 5 years. My life is not a nonstop parade of rainbows and unicorns. I'm still, by almost any definition, a workaholic, just the way I was when I was a 28-year-old kid at ABC News. I still firmly believe that if you're trying to be great at anything, your work, volunteering, parenting, grandparenting, there's a certain amount of stress, striving, and plotting and planning involved. That's just part of the deal. I've just gotten better, some percentage of the time, at drawing the line between what I call constructive anguish and useless rumination. Now, if my wife was here, she would give you the 90% still a moron speech. And my younger brother, the one who I invested convinced to invest in the Palm Pilot, he has proposed that we rename the book From Deeply Flawed to Merely Flawed. If I can leave you with one thing today, give it a shot. 5 to 10 minutes a day of meditation can change the relationship between you and the voice in your head. And if you have psoriasis, it can also help with that. Here's my little tagline. If it can work for a fidgety, skeptical newsman, it can work for you. Thank you.